Karen Reed just filed a new bombshell lawsuit, and I'm going to tell you right now the messages that were allegedly sent by investigators in her criminal case that are a part of this complaint not only are some of the worst stuff I've read in quite some time, it may change the whole game in this story. I'm going to break down this lawsuit and what you need to know right now. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. All right, before we jump into this, I got to tell you about this sponsor, this partner of ours, because they have this app that I think you're going to love. It is called Upside. Upside gets you cash back, extra cash back on everyday purchases like gas, groceries, takeout. So here's what you do. You download Upside for free. You claim an offer at one of their 100,000 plus locations. You pay like normal with your card. You verify the purchase, and just like that, money back. So say I need to get gas or I want takeout one night, I'll search for Upside offers first, and after I spend, money appears in my app that I can transfer right into my bank account. And Upside's frequent users, they earn an average of $254 back a year. So to start getting your cash back, click the link in the description or scan the QR code. Make sure to use promo code SIDEBAR because you'll get an extra 25 cents bonus on every gallon on your first tank of gas. Look, I don't know if you saw the news, but there was a bombshell lawsuit just filed by Karen Reed. It is long, it is dense. I want to break it down for you, the key moments, give you the main points, and I really want to get into the shocking aspects of this, and also give you my take on the strengths, maybe the weaknesses of this lawsuit. But I got to put this into context, okay? Look, you know the name Karen Reed. She was found not guilty last year of murdering her Boston police officer boyfriend, John O'Keefe. Despite being tried twice, two separate trials, one was a hung jury, the prosecution's argument that she hit him with her car, led him to die in the cold weather outside of another police officer, Brian Albert's house. A jury did not agree that she killed John O'Keefe. Now, the defense had pointed to a sloppy and tainted investigation, making the argument that Reed was framed, really highlighted the investigators, particularly lead investigator Michael Proctor. Now, Proctor was actually fired from the Massachusetts State Police after a series of vulgar and sexist text messages were revealed, including some about Reed. So now Reed files this lawsuit against the Massachusetts State Police and the Canton Police Department through the town of Canton for employing Proctor and also employing Sean Goode from Canton PD, who was also a part of her case. He actually resigned, by the way, from the force this week. Now, as we'll get into, the argument is, and you're going to see this presented in the complaint, these guys should never have been hired, retained, nor allowed to investigate her case, and essentially they make the argument that there was a plot, a conspiracy to target her, that she was framed. I'm going to tell you right now, the alleged messages that were sent by these guys, this is what makes this something else. This is what makes this complaint one of the most disgusting things I have read in quite some time. This is why when we talk about, and I'll get into this, the immunity argument, right? Whether or not police officers and police departments, are they immune from being sued? It's these messages you got to call out. So let me get into the allegations, the text messages. Again, I'm going to tell you right now, brace yourself. A lot to get into. And also the causes of action, and I'll give my legal take on the case. Okay. By the way, this comes after another lawsuit has already been filed. So Karen Reed had filed a lawsuit in March of this year against the various officers and witnesses in her criminal case, the town of Canton too. But let's focus on this lawsuit, okay? Now I'm going to read you verbatim the opening parts of this lawsuit because me just describing it wouldn't do it justice. Quote, "The not guilty verdict in Commonwealth v. Karen Reed on June 18th, 2025 did not merely end a wrongful prosecution. It shone an unflinching spotlight on something the Massachusetts State Police, MSP, and the town of Canton Police Department, CPD, have spent years trying to conceal. An embedded culture of bigotry, misogyny, systemic failures, and institutional rot at the very core of both organizations. As a result of this entrenchment, Ms. Reed now files this action against MSP and CPD for their negligent hiring, training, and supervision of biased and corrupt police officers whose actions violated her constitutional rights and caused her immense harm. At the heart of Ms. Reed's claims lies a distressing narrative, one not just about individual rights, but about fundamental principles upon which our society is built. Through this action, the MSP and CPD will now be forced to answer for the police officers' unlawful conduct against Ms. Reed that is set forth in detail below, but also for the insidious culture of bigotry and misogyny that fostered such unlawful conduct and has likely resulted in other unconstitutional criminal investigations in which countless unknown others have also suffered. When I hear language like that, my legal mind perks up, because now I'm thinking, if you're talking about others who may be similarly situated as you, are you talking a bigger action? You're talking a class action? You're talking more people jumping on who believe, if they were investigated by Goode or Proctor, are they going to jump in on this? And there's one case in particular I'm going to mention a little bit later, but let's continue. Quote, indeed, the MSP and CPD have avoided facing this very moment for years, but it's now time for the long-awaited transparency and accountability owed to the citizens of this Commonwealth. By the way, when you file a lawsuit through the course of discovery and information being exchanged and a public trial, that's, the idea of transparency. Goes on to say, quote, former MSP Detective Michael Proctor and former CPD Sergeant Sean Goode are virulent bigots whose hatred for anyone and everyone different from themselves permeates their every action. They're not officers who occasionally voiced an offensive remark. They are men whose written and recorded communications sent to one another and to a circle of like-minded friends over the course of a decade establish entrenched and unrepentant hatred for women, Black Americans, Asian Americans, Jews, Hispanics, Arabs, and gay people. Their unfitness for any position of public trust was not subtle. It was extensively documented and, as set forth below, knowable to MSP and CPD long before either agency assigned them to investigate and prosecute Ms. Reed. Proctor's and Goode's involvement at the outset of the investigation into the death of John O'Keefe III invariably and irredeemably contaminated it in every respect. So in other words, it's not just that they made horrible comments. It shows that they were unfit to be part of this, that they shouldn't have been hired, they shouldn't have been retained, and that they showed a bias, and that infected the investigation. There's a connective tissue there that's going to have to be explored and proved, but I'm about to get into this, okay? So Karen Reed claims that this is in thousands of written and audio messages. Now, to be clear, I don't believe we've seen like an official report of these text messages, like the screenshots of them where you can see them for yourselves or anything like that. But the content of those messages is part of the complaint, and the complaint does include some quotes or alleged quotes. By the way, there's a footnote that the audio recordings are in a thumb drive that was attached as an exhibit to this complaint, but again, we don't have that. It goes on to say, quote, for the MSP and CPD, this is how they're trying to get them on the hook, who hired, trained, supervised, and observed these two for years, meaning you should have known or knew about this, Proctor's and Goode's hateful and despicable views were not only part of their own daily vernacular, but were woven through the fabric of their organization's culture and everyday conversations. I'm going to read you some of these alleged exchanges as carefully as I can. Okay, we're on YouTube, got to be careful. But I will just tell you this, I apologize. I apologize for how awful this is, okay? This one reportedly comes from Proctor after he tells or allegedly tells Goode about a multi-car accident in Canton. Quote, actually take your time. I saw an N-word was involved, so I wouldn't rush if you're working. Let them die. Sean Goode reportedly sent messages that said, eat a black D-word, and then simply the N-word. Proctor allegedly wrote, America sucks. Hitler was really onto something. Then the bleeping U.S. had to step in and ruin it. What about this? Detroit should be destroyed along with places like Flint, Michigan. They are breeding grounds for N-words to run wild. There's this one allegedly from Goode that just says, Jew effer. Proctor, my new VP is a giant malignant C-word. I pray to the heavens that some effed up insect from the Amazon crawls up her V, hatches eggs, and the litter kills her by eating her from the inside out. My gosh. How about this one, allegedly from Sean Goode? He's a Jew, so deaf puts out. How about this one, allegedly from Michael Proctor? Deport their asses. I don't care if they're here legally or what their excuse was. Effing deport those sand N-words. And apparently they claim Proctor wrote this one, referring to his girlfriend's, let's just say, backside. I can't even get bleeping near that thing. I make every effort possible. I wait till she's asleep and I try to get at it. I try every effort possible. I try to get her hammered. I can't get anywhere near it. It's starting to piss me off. It's not cool. I'm not going to read more. I feel pretty disgusting, but you get it. You get the idea. If you are interested in looking at all of them, if that's what you want to do, go to the Law&Crime Plus app. We have a case files for Karen Reed. This lawsuit is put up there and you could read all of them for yourself. But again, here's the argument. That these men shouldn't have been hired, they shouldn't have been retained, they shouldn't have been allowed to investigate a criminal case, allegedly showing their bias, particularly when the subject, the Karen Reed case, was a female. She was a female suspect. Says, quote, Proctor and Goode believed these folks were polluting the neighborhoods in which they lived and worked and where they eventually served. They did more than just subscribe to and act in conformance with their bigotry. They actually memorialized in writing and voice messages to their like-minded friends. Not a few communications, thousands of them. They discussed sharing private nude pictures of women and intentionally, let's just say, finishing with women while they slept. Few protected classes, community members, or public figures were spared. And this is the background. This is the background for why they shouldn't have investigated Reed, that they had a bias against her. And it goes to show, and what they're trying to say is they should have never been investigators. Quote, in addition to these horrific statements indicating the extent to which he believed those with backgrounds and characteristics similar to him, white male, were superior to others, women, non-whites, Proctor also wasn't shy about his other proclivities that made him patently unfit for service, including that, more than once, Proctor discussed planting coke on people and shoving a nightstick up someone's rear end. Very important. Very important, because you and I both know there were allegations that evidence was planted in the Karen Reed case. I'll talk about that in a little bit. Quote, put simply, they were then and are now completely and unquestionably unfit to hold positions of authority with MSP and CPD, much less to play important roles, or in Miss Reed's case, the primary role in homicide investigations. And despite that CPD had received, reviewed, verified, and analyzed these same messages nearly a year ago, Sergeant Goode remained employed with full rank as a sworn police officer by the CPD until 2 days ago. Let's get into Karen Reed. On January 29, 2022, the MSP and CPD unleashed these two misogynist bigots on Miss Reed to work on the conflicted and corrupt investigation into the death of Mr. O'Keefe. It did not take long to trigger their hatred and target Miss Reed. Indeed, Proctor, Goode, other police officers, and the respective organizations understood the assignment once their fellow cops and friends, Brian and Nicole Albert, Matthew and Jennifer McCabe, and Brian Higgins, falsely reported that Mr. O'Keefe never went inside the house, even though his face was battered and bruised. He had dog bites and scratches on his arm, and he had a severe laceration on the back of his head that could only have come from a backward fall onto a ridged surface in the house rather than a flat front lawn. Basically, this goes to the allegation that he went in that house that night after Karen Reed dropped him off, and he was beaten up, he was killed, left for dead outside, as opposed to her running him over. Quote, law enforcement began immediately targeting and framing the female outsider, Miss Reed. See the key there, female? As the MSP's assigned lead investigator, without knowing any more about Miss Reed than she was an outsider and a female, Proctor openly exposed his ossified prejudice when he described her to his group chat buddies as a, quote, retarded whack job C-word with no ass that leaks poo, whom they decided hours in the investigation had, quote, zero chance skating. Quote, she's effed, he pronounced. Proctor intended to, quote, make cut and dry so he and his close-knit circle of friends could pin it on the, quote, girl. Quote, immediately after Miss Reed's arrest, Goode made the same type of sexualized and dehumanizing comment about Miss Reed's medical conditions and physical appearance that he and Proctor peddled in the hallways of their organizations on a daily basis. Quote, Jesus, Every girl will want a brain tumor, multiple sclerosis, colitis if you can look like that in yoga pants after killing your boyfriend. Meanwhile, as Goode pondered Miss Reed in yoga pants, Proctor seized Miss Reed's phone and launched immediately into a search for naked pictures of her, only to report back to his colleagues and friends, disappointingly, no nudes so far. But as he wrote to others as the investigation began, he, quote, hoped that she, quote, kills herself. MSP and CPD's investigative approach was born out of Proctor and Goode's perverse and depraved pattern of singling out and vilifying an outsider while protecting the blue line and their families, meaning police. This was, of course, made more palatable by dehumanizing Miss Reed. With the help of Goode and CPD, Proctor and his colleagues at MSP, including his direct supervisor, Yuri Buchanek, conducted a fundamentally conflicted and corrupt investigation where the goal was to pin it on the girl and which included rampant violations of policies, procedures, and ethical rules. For example, and as described further below, despite the overwhelming evidence that Mr. O'Keefe was inside the house, they did not search the home for blood, fingerprints, or DNA evidence. The house was neither processed nor photographed by a forensic criminalist. Indeed, the investigators did not even walk into the crime scene house until a week later, and then only for a pro forma visit and brief interview of Nicole Albert. No effort was made to secure evidence from the Albert's German Shepherd, meaning because they thought the dog could have bitten John O'Keefe, which would tend to show that he was in the house, right, and that Karen Reed didn't kill him. Goes on to say, quote, even though Mr. O'Keefe's body was found in the front yard with fresh and obvious dog bites and scratches on his right arm. Proctor and Buchanek manufactured evidence to ensure that Miss Reed was blamed for Mr. O'Keefe's death, intentionally diverting attention away from Proctor's friends and fellow law enforcement officers. This included planting evidence at the scene on Mr. O'Keefe's clothes and on Miss Reed's vehicle to support the House defendant's false narrative that Miss Reed struck Mr. O'Keefe with her vehicle, notwithstanding that the investigators knew Mr. O'Keefe's injuries were inconsistent with a motor vehicle strike and consistent with a physical altercation and dog attack. And this is the big part. Among other failures, MSP's and CPD's delegation of power and authority to those as biased, corrupt, and bigoted as Proctor and Goode led to Miss Reed being wrongfully accused of homicide for 3.5 years and subjected to suspicion, 2 arrests, 2 prosecutions, and public trials and public condemnation. Indeed, with the exercise of ordinary care, which we'll talk about, both MSP and CPD would have known that Proctor, Goode, and others were unfit for service from the beginning. And to try to prove that Proctor himself knew he was unqualified, they go, quote, Proctor himself acknowledged this fact in 2017 after 4 years on the job, telling his friends, quote, no idea how I passed the background. Remember when I mentioned other cases? For those of you who know the Sandra Birchmore case, comes up in this. Quote, as just one example, in 2022, as an 18-year veteran of CPD, Goode shared his views in writing on Sandra Birchmore, a young woman who tragically died the year before in Canton and whose death was initially ruled a suicide until federal authorities discovered that multiple officers from the neighboring town, Stoughton's Police Department, had been sexually abusing Miss Birchmore when she was a minor. After federal authorities investigated, they charged a former Stoughton police officer with her murder, and her death is now classified as a homicide at the federal level. The Norfolk County District Attorney's Office early this year changed her death from suicide to undetermined. Against this backdrop, Goode told his friends, quote, that chick was borderline retarded. Now, how it could have an effect on the criminal prosecution in that case, we'll wait and see. But again, you can go back to that earlier argument where Reed seems to suggest you take her allegations as true, she may not be the only one affected. Going back to Goode, complaint says, quote, he apparently relished his ability to use his institutional power, authority, and access to illegally obtain information about women he encountered in his daily life, writing in 2015, ha ha ha, can't wait to look this C word up tonight at work. Yeah, not great for a guy assigned to the Karen Reed case. Okay. Those are basically the statement of alleged facts here put forward by Karen Reed. Now I want to go into the causes of action, the counts, what she's suing for. Count 1, negligence against the Massachusetts State Police. And the basic idea is that MSP owes a duty to the public, a duty to make sure that their troopers don't cause harm. You got to train them, you got to supervise them properly. It's about what's reasonable care, It's about what is foreseeable, this foreseeable harm your troopers could cause. And here the argument is that MSP breached its duty to Karen Read by, among other things, allegedly by hiring and keeping Proctor on the force when they knew or should have known he was unfit for the job, that they failed to properly train him and others, allowed him to investigate the Karen Read case even though they claim he had personal relationships with the witnesses and potential suspects. And they also make the allegation that the MSP allowed him to allegedly fabricate and plant evidence. And the harm for Read, they claim, she was improperly investigated and prosecuted. Claim she lost her career, her home, her car, her reputation, lost her freedom for years, had to go through 2 public trials. I want to actually highlight something that's in the complaint about that. It says, quote, as for the MSP, both before and during the Proctor-led investigation, his immediate supervisor, who we mentioned before, Buchanan, provided his annual employment reviews. True to form, despite knowing firsthand the extent of Proctor's unlawful conduct, bias, and bigotry, Buchanan repeatedly and falsely wrote that, quote, Proctor has handled himself with the utmost professionalism and with strict integrity, and confirmed that they had successfully discussed MSP's policies concerning anti-harassment, sexual harassment, and discrimination and diversity, among others. Quote, other times the MSP simply looked the other way. For example, in February 2024, 4 months before Miss Read's first trial, the MSP was aware they had a problem specifically related to Miss Read's case. The Department of Justice had begun investigating the investigators and on February 1st questioned Proctor in a grand jury proceeding about text messages he wrote in which he called Miss Read a C-word, among other bigoted comments the Department of Justice had found. Proctor was also questioned about his text at 11 p.m. on January 29, 2022, that House defendant Brian Albert would escape scrutiny in the investigation because, quote, he's a Boston cop too. Further, Proctor was confronted at this grand jury about texts from Julie Albert to his sister, Courtney Proctor, asking to give Proctor a gift for some implied favor he did for the Alberts during their interviews for the case. On February 4th, 2024, Proctor had a meeting and told the highest level of leadership at the MSP, Colonel John E. Maughan, recently retired, Lieutenant Brian Connors, recently retired, and Major Leonard Coppenrath, active, about his testimony to the Department of Justice, including his text messages. They did not terminate him, did not immediately ask for his phone, and did not immediately investigate his bigotry. They knew it existed and where to find it, but they didn't want to, at least until Miss Read's trial was over. Indeed, they tried to hide it from Miss Read and the public, despite initiating an internal affairs investigation in early March 2024 before the jury in Miss Read's first criminal trial was even impaneled. It was not until Miss Read's defense counsel found out about these messages and then used them during the public trial that MSP concluded it couldn't ignore this any longer. Count 2, negligence, but this time it's against the town of Canton through the Canton Police Department. Same kind of thing. CPD allegedly had a duty to the public to make sure its officers, its employees don't harm anyone. This is very much about the allegations regarding Goode, so similar to Proctor. But there's also this too, quote, failing to properly supervise and train Sergeant Michael Lank in his failure to inspect or secure the scene where Mr. O'Keefe's body was found, inspect the House defendant's bodies for evidence of a fight, or ask to search the House defendant's phones, all on the morning of January 29th, 2022. Failing to preserve, protect, and secure various surveillance video inside and outside the Sally Port, including, but not limited to, setting the auto-delete function on such videos to 30 days and not preserving these particular videos for a longer period of time. Attempting to obfuscate and hide from Miss Read's criminal defense team's surveillance video footage from inside the police station and outside in the parking lot on relevant days. Failing to supervise the relationship between Proctor and Kevin Albert, providing Brian Higgins with access to the CPD station without supervision, and once CPD knew, Higgins used the CPD station in the middle of the night immediately following the house party on the night of Mr. O'Keefe's death, failing to investigate and report that fact to the MSP. Allegation there, did he do something or have access to the evidence in any way? Count 3. Civil conspiracy against both the MSP and town of Canton. Now, this is an interesting one. I wonder if it's going to be tricky. Essentially, the allegation is that MSP and CPD had a common plan or design to focus entirely this investigation into the death of O'Keefe improperly against Read. Now, here are my thoughts on this lawsuit. First of all, those messages, those alleged messages, if they're produced, incredibly bad. Incredibly bad if true. I mean, I say this all the time, but it is very hard to excuse or put into context alleged messages, right? And even when you saw Proctor testify in Reed's first trial and him having to explain things that he sent, there was nothing left to say. Now, I don't know if all of those messages would come into a trial here. The argument would be many of these are too inflammatory. They might be irrelevant to Reed's case. So the key would be to say, look at all of these messages. This is a pattern. It shows how unfit Proctor and Goode are to serve, to investigate, and particularly to look into a case, to investigate a case regarding a female suspect and a dead police officer. It shows their bias. That could be an argument. And I'll just tell you right now, if the jury hears those messages, oh boy, that is not going to be great for MSP or CPD. Now, I do think that an immunity argument could be raised too. Question if it'll be successful. What do I mean? Under the law, we talk about qualified immunity, sovereign immunity. It basically protects state and local governments and police departments and police officers from being sued in connection with the performance of their duties and performance of their jobs. And that makes sense, right? Not every arrest is going to lead to a prosecution. Not every prosecution is going to lead to a conviction. We have the court for that reason. We have the legal system for that reason. It would be improper if every suspect or criminal defendant could then just turn around and sue the prosecutors or police departments for millions of dollars arguing their rights were violated. Everybody says they're innocent, but that would have a chilling effect. Argument would be there would be no more arrests, no more prosecution, including of legitimate criminals, because there would be a fear by the prosecutors and by law enforcement and police officers. They would have a fear of being sued. So you need to have a sense of immunity. You need to have a sense of protection there. That would be the argument. Would it be successful? Look, here's what the defendants would argue, right? We had legitimate evidence against Karen Reed. You may disagree with it, but we had real evidence. Her alleged problematic statements referring to how she hit John O'Keefe, even in a media interview where she seemed to, wonder if she did it, that she was able to immediately know where his body was as they were driving around trying to find him. The driving conditions were bad. There was the argument that the cell phone data from O'Keefe's phone showed it was always outside, meaning he never went into the house. The alleged shattered taillight of her car. There was different, testimony regarding the impact, and there was different testimony regarding his injuries, John O'Keefe's injuries. So they could say, look, we had evidence to believe she did it. But the way to pierce that immunity is saying, no, this wasn't just a sloppy investigation. This wasn't like we just made a mistake. This wasn't just bad police work. No. The way they may be able to pierce that immunity is saying you cannot protect police officers or police department if they are willfully, wantonly engaging in misconduct. If their targeting of Reed was improper and it was done with malice. That's where this conspiracy thing comes up, right? There was a conspiracy to frame her or set her up or not properly investigate. Again, it has to be more than a sloppy investigation. It has to be really egregious, willful, wanton, wrong conduct. Is that there? Can you show a conspiracy, an agreement between MSP and CPD to harm Reed? Essentially, that's the argument. And look, you do wonder what also will come out through discovery and through a trial, because Karen Reed's criminal case, for the defense, it was not about the defense putting on a case, proving a case, to prove police corruption or a conspiracy. It was about raising reasonable doubt as to her guilt, showing improper police work. They didn't have the burden to prove that there was corruption. They didn't have the burden to prove that there was a conspiracy. It's different in a civil case, right? Particularly one more focused on the authorities and their training and their hiring and their past work. That's what this civil case is about. So this may ultimately result in more answers and more explanation than we saw in the criminal cases. So for those who say, will this be the way to get to the truth about what happened to John O'Keefe? Maybe, maybe not. Now, let's talk about the responses. Karen Reed went on the Today Show, NBC, this morning, said that John O'Keefe is the reason they're doing this. Quote, John was the victim of this institutional corruption, and we're the voice for John. Went on to say, this was always our plan, that I had to save my own life first. I can't do anything if I'm not free. I had to fight for my freedom for years, and I knew as it unfolded I was never going to be able to just forget that this happened to me that I was wronged in this way. I couldn't just go back to life as it was. I have to continue fighting for justice. One of Reed's attorneys, Alan Jackson, also said to the Today Show, what Karen wants, you cannot write on a check, which is exposure. Exposure of the corruption that is the DNA of the Massachusetts State Police and the Canton Police Department. Now, MSP commented on the alleged messages in this complaint, calling them abhorrent and entirely inconsistent with any basic standard of decency. In fact, the MSP superintendent, Colonel Jeffrey Noble, said that those alleged text messages, quote, do not reflect the values of the Massachusetts State Police and are not tolerated within our ranks. They underscore and fully support my decision to terminate Michael Proctor. Now, a lawyer representing Proctor made this statement to NBC Boston, quote, that whatever Mr. Proctor did or said in his personal life had no bearing whatsoever on the investigation of Karen Reed. But there you go, breakdown of what happened in this lawsuit. We'll continue to follow what happens next. Thanks so much for joining us here on Sidebar, everybody. As always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. You can also check us out on NBC's Peacock as well. If you want to follow me, X, Instagram, my News Nation show, Jesse Weber Live, Monday through Friday, 11 p.m. Eastern. I'll see you next time, everybody.